Anderson?
Here.
Jefferson?
Here.
Hicks?
Here.
Fish?
Here.
Baker?
Here.
Longy's absent, and Romer.
Here.
All right, we've got a change of order on the discussion items. We're going to move number 2 up to number 1. So ordinance updates from Andrew Bemseth and potentially Annie.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members. Before you this morning, we have a few just items we want to discuss briefly and see what you guys think and whether or not it's something worth exploring further. There's kind of 2 items packaged in one here, and I'm going to break them apart just so we don't confuse the 2 of them. First of all, the Planning Commission has been speaking about this as it was brought to their attention by Greater Fergus Falls that we don't currently allow warehousing or commercial indoor storage in all of our business districts. So one of the things that we've been seeing is an interest in some of that activity in our vacant big box retail stores. So the Planning Commission has discussed whether or not we want to add to the code that we would allow this commercial indoor storage or warehousing within the vacant stores of the B5, B6, and B3 zones, which would encompass the Sunmart building, the Kmart building, the mall, Shopko, all of those things. And we're proposing that those would be allowed as an interim use rather than a permanent use. And as you may recall, when we passed the interim use ordinance a few months ago, those interim uses expire after 5 years at a max. So it's not like you're giving permission for this to be the perpetual use going forward. It would be more of a interim use, short-term use, something that would allow these businesses in need of the storage, and the ones that have expressed an interest are existing industries here in the community. You'd be giving them an opportunity for more available vacant space in the immediate time frame and allowing the building owners to continue to look at filling it with other uses. So that's really the idea. Annie, if you want to add something to that from your perspective, why this would be important to the folks you're talking to and meeting with, I think that would be important.
Absolutely. Good morning, Annie Decker, Greater Fergus Falls. Thank you. Yes, everything Andrew said was correct. In addition, allowing temporary space, it won't only help current businesses that we have here, predominantly a lot of the manufacturers who are looking to do expansions in the future. It's a space for them to store their product. Temporarily, they'll really plan their expansions, but additionally, in working and redeveloping some of these parcels, it's actually a good incentive for potential buyers and investors as well, because as they're doing all their due diligence and putting together a plan to redevelop the site, they're able to have some income coming in to help offset the cost of the building. So those are 2 main things that would really be helpful in the work that we're doing.
And then, we can discuss that one, and then I'll move on to the second one. So I don't know, does anybody have any thoughts on that? So the Planning Commission has discussed this. The city planner has asked that the council weigh in on whether or not they want the city attorney to draft this language. If so, then it would go to the Planning Commission, have a public hearing, they would recommend, and then it would come back ultimately to the city council for action. So just looking for somewhat of a consensus this morning, if that's something you want us to continue to work towards, and have Rolf draft that language to go before the Planning Commission.
I would make that recommendation.
I'll second it. I would second it.
All right, is this an all in favor, say aye.
Yeah, it would be a motion to direct the city attorney.
All right, we've got a motion to direct the attorney to come up with the language to allow the interim use in the business districts. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
All right, so the second piece of the item here is related to tax exempt uses in these zones. In discussing with Greater Fergus Falls again, and something that we've talked about for a long time, is whether or not we want to no longer allow tax exempt uses to be in these retail stores. The thought behind this is simply to retain the tax base that these big box stores bring to the community. If all of the stores were filled by tax exempt users, whether it be the school district, the city, churches, nonprofits, whatever that may be, the city would lose over $186,000 a year in property tax revenue, which would be significant for the city's budget. So just wanted to start a conversation about that, if that's something that the council is willing to entertain, or if we want to leave it the way it is. I don't know if Annie has anything to add on this specific piece, but we've talked about this in great detail, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to that too, it's also when you take a look at these big box sites, we have a very finite number of resources for future tax-based growth. In between Shopko, Sunmark, Kmart, and the mall, it's about 33 acres. And not only is that a significant portion of our tax base, but those are also sites that have the highest potential to exponentially grow from a tax-based perspective. So we brought that up along with, I believe at the next planning commission, we'll be discussing other uses potentially that could be a good fit for the big boxes. So it's not necessarily, there's a way you can do the zoning code too, so it's not exempting them from all of those zoning districts across the city, like the downtown. It's perhaps on certain parcels larger than an acre or something of that nature. So it'd be simply for the big boxes, because we've been getting a lot of feedback as well about the Target building and why that would be permitted, and it's simply because exempt uses as of now are permitted in every zoning district in the city. So it's just an effort to preserve our existing tax base and the future potential for exponential growth as well.
The only thing I would add is just to reiterate exactly what Annie just said about the downtown. As it stands today, downtown is B3 zone, so we'd have to get creative in the language to ensure that we don't exclude properties that shouldn't be excluded if this is the direction we go. So just wanted to reiterate that again, so people aren't saying we're going to blanket the town with these restrictions. But the intent is these bigger stores with the high-end potential, like Annie was saying.
And each property would be able to be looked at on an individual basis if someone had a request, of course, right?
Not if,
Not necessarily. So between those 4 big boxes, there's 3 different zonings. So we'd have to take a more comprehensive look at the city as a whole. And as far as is downtown B3, B2?
B3, yeah.
I think a simple way to do it from a planning perspective is to say any site larger than 1 acre, these uses are prohibited or something of that nature. So there's a way you can be creative and definitely make sure it's only addressing these big box sites.
Sure.
So with that being said, this is more of a preliminary discussion at the planning commission level. They have the previous item we just talked about, they've talked about a little bit more, but they're in the same situation where they want to know if this is something that the city council would entertain and if they should spend the attorney time to draft that and bring it forward. But the same process would stand there, where they would bring that back to the planning commission. They meet again on January 27th. And then the public hearing would take place at some point with the recommendation coming back to the city council for final action.
I think it's definitely something that we should explore. I mean, because if we keep losing tax base, that's just going to push up, obviously. And I think, as you say, if there was an exception, it would be, is it going to create jobs, that are well-funded jobs? Because it's like the armory is, I think, going to be the same, so.
It would seem to me, the only thing I would say is, I don't know what that exception would be, but if there's an exception out there, we would at least be able to consider it. And again, I don't know what that is 5 years from now.
Yep.
We might want to consider, seems to me there would have to be some language that would be easily put in there, that if there's something that we're not expecting 5 years from now, we would be able to look at it. But I totally agree with the concept of preserving the tax base.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just going to mention, I wouldn't advocate for this, but if 5 years down the road the landscape's different, the council can always change the language however they want it to. You shouldn't go back and forth, but you never know what 5 years is going to bring, and that ability exists.
I just had a quick question on that. We currently have 2 churches, one downtown and one over on Tower Road.
We have more than
What's that? Okay, well, these are the 2 that I know. These are the ones that stick out at me. Currently, are they just renting those facilities, or?
I think Cornerstone owns their facility.
So how would that affect them?
They're B3, so they would be able to.
Well, yeah, Your Honor, Councilmember Thompson, we would have to draft the language so it would be, like Andy mentioned, a site that's maybe bigger than an acre.
Okay.
So we're not blanket covering B3. And the other thing I would mention is existing uses are not going to be impacted. You don't go backwards and make people leave the space that they're in.
Okay.
Scott, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I guess the concern is to maintain the tax base. I understand that, and I think that's not a bad concept, and I think that encouraging the people that are trying to bring in developers to look for those kinds of uses is clearly a good idea. But there are a lot of nonprofits that are big employers, and so, you know, you take a look at like a Thrivent or something like that, if they wanted to establish a branch office here and employ, you know, 75 people in a big box deal, I don't know why we would want to stop that from happening. So there's something to be said for bringing in the jobs, whether or not it's a tax-based thing. And I just am a little, I don't know that the situation we've got right now is holding anybody up, you know, from developing anything. But I think it's probably right to encourage development for tax-producing properties. But I wouldn't want to rule out anything right now.
Okay, thanks. Tom?
So, Annie, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if a situation like this were to come up, what might be some ideas you would have to deal with that?
That would be something, I think, in discussion with Ralph. I don't know from a legal standpoint, you could always potentially, make them a conditional use. So that means that the planning commission and council would have to review the use first before allowing them to have a conditional use permit. I don't know from a legal standpoint if you can write into ordinance certain jobs or maybe your average hourly wage or that type of thing. Sometimes the more restrictive you get, kind of the harder it gets, but I do see your point. There are a lot of nonprofits that are very big employers as well. So I kind of went back and forth on this, but from the mission of Greater Fergus Falls and preserving tax base, that's kind of where I stand on that element. And then additionally, if it is the alternative and the council wants to see these nonprofit uses there, then obviously my focus will shift a little bit because I don't want to aggressively work with these developers if ultimately they do want to see some type of nonprofit or civic use there. So it's just getting a little more clarification.
And going back to what Andrew said, I mean, if that situation did come up, it's not like we're tying our hands permanently. From what I understand, I mean, we could change something if this particular situation did come up. Certainly, yeah. Your Honor, Councilmember Roofer, I would just remind everybody too, this is in the infancy stage, and so, we don't have to have a robust discussion today because we'll have to work with the city attorney to get the language right. And we're not entirely sure the planning commission is going to endorse this, but they wanted to see what potential language could look like and to ask the attorney and other staff to spend time on this. We thought it was appropriate to just get the flavor of the council without, making anybody take a position or pinning them down or anything like that. So, if you're on the fence, I would say send it to Planning Commission, let them have a public hearing and discuss it, and we'll have the opportunity to say yes or no down the road. Do we need to take any action?
Well, just
Same as the previous one, Your Honor, directing the city attorney to draft it, and we'll bring it forward. Yeah, I would make a motion.
offer that motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Krista. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. We on number 3.
2 or
One.
Yeah.
So next we'll go to, thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
Next we'll go to item number 1, discussion on recycling rates. City Finance Director Bill Sommer. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning. Thank you, Your Honor. Within your packet, we have a memo here talking about our recycling rates a bit. And we had mentioned this to you when we went through the budget and talked about utility rates. We're a little bit inconsistent on some of our application of recycling rates out there. When we look at commercial rates, certainly your residential rate, your single-family dwellings are at $6 a month. And then some of the smaller, when you look at some apartments that stand next to each other, we look at that can look like individual units, but they are apartment buildings. So we started really combing through the commercial rates one by one, actually, and kind of pulling that apart and thinking, okay, if we have a large building where 21 plus units, that should probably be at a higher rate than something that's 2 to 4 units, just for equity in that is some of what we started looking at. And then the trailer parks also came up. And since the recycling program was implemented back, I'd say it's probably in the early 90s, the rates have been as they have been. So it's not like something changed along the way. But when we look at that, we are treating all those individual units within a trailer park as individual residences. They do recycle in large bins in one spot in those, so we don't go door to door in those trailer parks. So And that was brought up by one of the owners of the parks, and I know Guy and Sandy looked at comparing, how do we compare to other cities with that? And it looks like other cities do treat those more as multifamily housing rather than individual units from a recycling perspective. So that's a little of the history why we looked at this and why we're before you today. Looking at putting in a tiered structure for this. So residential units would stay the same at $6, so no change there. And then 2 to 4 units at $6. So, we'd keep that similar to a single-family home. 5 to 9 units would be that commercial rate of $7.58, and that is our current rate, so we're not changing those rates. But then 10 to 20 units would be twice the rate of those, of that commercial rate, and then 21 plus units would be 3 times that rate. So we have, as we go forward, and if we make changes to this, then, we have, easy application there, much like we do with our stormwater system, and kind of looked at this mirroring that a little bit, and like our rental registration with those different tiers. Now, some are going to see a decrease, others are going to see an increase. So like a large apartment building currently paying $7.58 a month would go up to $22.74. So some will see that increase. Others, like the trailer parks, would see a significant increase, which you'll see in the bottom of my memo. We actually see a net projection overall of a decrease in recycling revenue. But when we look at the whole picture, this seems to be the right thing to do. So that's why we're bringing it forward to you. And then to have it standardized as well, so that you kind of take some of the judgment out of it. And it's, if you fall in these categories, this will be the rate, and we can be consistent across the entire city. So that's kind of my goal in that. Sandy, am I missing anything that I should have said that I'm forgetting? But
Thanks, Bill. Any questions from the council? Yes.
I would like to see us obviously be net neutral as opposed to $12,000 deficit.
yeah,
So, if we went up by, I don't know what the multiplier is, but, if we went to like 858 and 6, if you kind of added another dollar, would you end up being net neutral?
right. We could certainly look at that, bring each one up slightly and see. I, of course, like net neutral as well. I have trouble decreasing revenue, but we're just being completely transparent laying it out to you today. So we could certainly look at that. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is implementation. I was thinking, if this is a route we're going to go in January, we would maybe change the trailer parks before others, because this is going to be a larger implementation. It may take us 2-3 months to get everything implemented. So with that being said, if you as a council want to look at that, what a net neutral would look like, we could come back to you. And we don't have to act on this in January either. This is a big change, and we want to make sure we're doing it right.
Just one comment on that too, with regard to the net neutral. Really, there are 3 mobile home parks, and they are taking the majority.
Probably
of this.
10,000 of that will.
13,000 actually.
Okay.
So between the 3 of them, they're charged $13,000 a year for their recycling. So unless you are going to keep them at a per unit charge, we're not going to get net neutral. Does that make sense? Because
Or he's thinking if we increase the rates to everyone then, what would it take to?
Make up the difference.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Your per unit for apartments would go up significantly.
Yeah.
This is the thing. In order, your tiers would have to be very different
Yeah.
to make it net neutral, because so much of the burden is carried by those.
Because if we're charging $6 per single family unit, and then you can have 4 apartments and it's only $6, then technically that theoretically should be 12 to 14 or 12 to 24, depending on how many people there are, the size of the apartments.
Yeah.
So I think that if we're saying a single family home, I don't know what the average is 2 adults, 1 child, 2 plus 1 or whatever, but I think we should look at, somebody has to make up the $12,000. So if we don't bring it in, it's going to come from some of the funds, so some of the taxpayer is going to pay that.
Right. Part of how we came up with this, and Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I said, when we looked at everything that's out there, we looked where are we at overall. So we set these units by really where we're at to minimize a lot of the changes. So that's how we arrived at this. But we can certainly go back if you'd like and bring some other options just to see what they would look like. Is that the council's wishes, or what would you like to see?
I mean, there's still, it would seem to me, I think what Anthony's saying is right. There's still some pretty big discrepancies between 2 to 4, that's at $3 per unit versus $1 a unit or less than $1 at 21 plus on some of those.
Yep, and for instance, on those 2 to 4 units are often a house that's been converted to apartments, and they probably have one recycling can. That's what's driven having a $6 charge there. Again, why we looked at it and said, we feel kind of inconsistent on some of this, so we want to try to develop a program that makes a lot of good sense, so.
Yeah, I think we all probably agree that the direction is right. Maybe just come back with a tweak.
Sure.
Closer to net neutral. And
If we don't have something for Monday, then we'll bring it in February. So, 'cause again, I'd like to take our time and do it right rather than rush something.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But if something can make sense yet before Monday, we can come back to you, but we'll play that by ear a little bit. All right,
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
thank you.
Item number 3 is public improvement number 5956, 2019 Burlington Avenue Street and Utility Improvement Project.
Thank you.
Brian.
Good morning, Your Honor and members. Yes, this is in regards to the Burlington Avenue reconstruction project that extends from essentially Randolph Avenue to East Mount Faith. Patch and Messner, who previously did our property appraisals for our 429, they have substantially completed the appraisal report for this particular project. The next step is to complete the preliminary engineering report pursuant to 429 statute. Upon the completion of this report, we'll have a cost split of the project improvements along with a comparison, once again, of what the special benefit increase is to the adjacent properties versus the market value increase. Because of this, I solicited more engineering to complete this process and actually the final design for this project. They have proposed a fee of $27,920. I think this is reasonable in comparison to the total estimated project cost shown below. This project, similar to the East Mount Faith, is going to be proposing at this time, but upon the completion, we'll have better numbers. But utilizing special assessments, city share will also have some special assessment. But due to that, I'm looking to enhance and seek state aid funds to cover a portion, primarily a portion that's adjacent to Willisville Park, if you know in the area. Also going to be looking sanitary sewer fund, water, and storm enterprise funds. But once again, this will be known a little bit more upon the completion of the engineering report. So at this time, I'm requesting accept Moore Engineering's preliminary professional services proposal for design and report for the amount of $27,920.
Tom, do you have a question?
I will offer that.
I'll second it. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jim. Questions, Scott?
Brian, was Moore Engineering the same company that did the work for the neighboring property that was
Yes,
worked on
sir.
last year?
Yep. I try to work with consultants, with our locals as best I can, kind of splitting, but kind of they have familiarity best with the project. I do solicitations to others, but in certain instances, I'll just do direct negotiations with them, so.
Any other questions for Brian?
Yeah, Burlington is in need, so it's
Yeah.
good that we're getting on that
Certainly
one.
is.
Absolutely.
My bike tires, thank you.
All right, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Number 4 is Public Improvement 5955, Bancroft and Whitford.
Excuse me, that one I believe was removed from the pack.
Got it, I'm on the wrong agenda. 5330. All right, how about College Way? College Way.
Yes, thank you. This is in regards to public improvement 5330, College Way Street Improvement Project. If you refer to the map, I'm looking to the north here. That shows the approximate limits of this project. College Way from Tower Road to Lincoln Avenue. We reviewed the criteria for this project. We're looking for, at this time, considering it more of a resurfacing project. If you recall, this was recently done on Lincoln and College Way to the west. I've noted some things that we indicated in our pavement management system about this particular street. With the PCIs and levels that we're looking right now, it'd be appropriate time to start looking at this street segment. With this project, we'll also be reviewing some of the existing striping and look to do some enhancements for bike lanes that has been presented. This project's on a municipal state aid route, therefore it's eligible expense through our state aid funds. So it would be through those dollars versus any tax levy dollars. So at this time, I'm requesting initiating public improvement 5330, College Way Street Improvement Project, and accept Interstate Engineering's professional services proposal for design in a not to exceed amount of $19,500.
Thank you, Brian. Is there someone like to offer that motion?
I'll offer that.
I'll second
Thanks,
that.
Caroline. Thanks, Brent. Any questions of the council? Scott?
Again, Brian, on this one, was it Interstate that worked on the College Way project last year?
Yes.
Okay, so it's another neighboring, similar, familiar with the area.
Well, this one I did solicit two of our locals that are
Yep.
competent in this work. but-
I just thought it was an advantage, given the intersections that are that are impacted, that work with the guys that have been there before.
It does help. It's something that we take in consideration.
Thanks, Brian. Any other questions? If not, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Item number 5 is Public Improvement 5329, MnDOT Special Project 56013, the reconstruction project. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Your Honor. This particular project has been presented to the city over some time, not in regards to our recent utility impacts, but sequencing, they are still planning on proceeding with this project this next summer. A long time ago, they approached the city, particularly the airport, about this project there. MnDOT's requesting to install snow fence along certain particular corridors, areas within this corridor for controlling snow embankments drifting across 210. One of this particular area, if you refer to the map, once again, looking on the right, is across from our airport runway protection zones that we consider these RPZs. Because of this, their need and everything, I requested a FAA determination along with SCH, our consultant, to look at this. We maintain these RPC zones for safe airport operations. These have been retained by the city from the adjacent property or for many, many years ago for airport development. Because we have the easement over and across this land for this airspace, with MnDOT's approach, we have to essentially consent to them occupying in that same space, not alone with a third party, which is a private property owner. But upon the review of the FAA determination, we determined there is no surface penetrations, therefore impacting airport operations or approach minimums with this project. So simply at this point is what I'm requesting. They've attached a draft agreement. We do have a slight exception with vegetation removal, but pretty minor, what I consider at this time. So I'm requesting authorize myself and the city attorney to execute MnDOT's easement agreement for the Fergus Falls Municipal Airport runway protection zone easement.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions from the committee? If not, there's someone like to offer that motion?
I'll make that.
Thank you, Brian.
I'll second, Your Honor.
Thank you, Justin. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Thank you, Brian. Item number 6 is a bicycle and pedestrian master plan. We'll call on Ryan Miller. Good morning, Ryan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, committee members. Back in 2018, the city received a $7,500 grant from West Central Initiative for the purposes of completing a bicycle and pedestrian master plan study. Since that time, in the last couple of years, there's been some back and forth amongst the members of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, whether to do the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan as a standalone plan or to volunteer those grant dollars towards a larger package of a comp plan funding package. Since then, starting towards the end of last year, a second grant has been potentially identified through an award from the state of Minnesota for the city hosting a pedestrian-friendly workshop last fall. So there's an additional $5,000 potentially available now for a bike and pedestrian master plan. The initial $7,500 grant the city did commit a dollar-for-dollar match, so an additional $7,500. And staff would be requesting a $5,000 match for the state of Minnesota grant that we're looking at through the workshop award. So with that new grant in mind, the BPAC is now recommending to go forward with the bicycle and pedestrian master plan as a standalone plan as opposed to waiting for it being included into a larger comprehensive plan. So requesting authorization to seek quotes to complete a bicycle and pedestrian master plan with a projected budget of around $25,000. That's for the 2 grants plus the match, the dollar-for-dollar matches for each grant.
Thanks, Ryan. Does the state grant require a dollar-for-dollar match?
It does not. From my initial kind of conversations with consultants that do these types of plans, $25,000 is around kind of the minimum. So just to close that gap from where we're at with the grant, the first grant and the match, and the $5,000 might be a bit short. So we request to find some additional $5,000. My suggestion would be to use some surplus from the community development budget from 2019. We had some staff shortages, so there was some budget surplus last year requesting to bring that forward into 2020 to be used in this plan.
And is there any opportunities to use like in-kind match towards this, like staff time or?
We can certainly
Volunteer.
do that. Yes, we did commit $7,500 in cash for that first grant, the West Central Initiative grant.
Sure. So we got the $7,500 cash. I just think like if we commit $25,000 and $12,500 from a match from the city, we're not necessarily opposed to that, but I have a feeling that then if we go out for quotes, they're going to come back at what we've committed to, rather than kind of seeing what the cost is and seeing how we could get there as a city. Does that make sense?
We can certainly, what the next step would be, if we're approved to get these quotes, staff would work with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee to try to figure out what we want
Sure.
in a kind of a mock scope of the plan, and then we would figure out
So right now we just
maybe
get
where
the
that's
quotes,
at.
Then you'd come back to the council and figure out how we're going to, which quote to accept and how we might pay for it. Is that okay? I misunderstood.
Sure.
Any questions from the council, or is there? Brett?
Well, when it comes to this, it's just one more master plan we're doing. I mean, every time we turn around, we're doing another survey, another master plan or something like this, and this is something I just don't think we need to do right now. I mean, we've got sidewalks, people know where to walk. When it comes to the bike sharrows, once again, this is an area that hits with me. There's a lot of money invested with that, and I understand the safety of it. I mean, personally, my kids, your kids, I'd rather see them driving on the sidewalk. People don't look for sharrows. They look for people on bikes, people walking. And I just don't think this is something that, this is money I don't think we need to spend right now. And when I went door to door, the one thing, there was only 2 things at the bottom of my list that people said they did not want to see. And one of them was the bike sharrows, and one of them was the dairy property. And I've stood by both of those. And you had mentioned one point as far as safety is concerned, and yeah, I agree with safety and everything else, but except for the commercial areas, there's no ordinance against riding your bike on the sidewalk. And there's a lot of maintenance and upkeep for all this. Plus, the fact is, anytime we start doing another road project, if one of these roads are within this master plan, we could end up seeing increased cost that instead of just going to repair the roads and then having money left over for another one, could end up raising the price. I mean, the minute we did Lincoln Avenue, they came forward and said, oh, we'd like a bike path and a barrier there. I just don't want to, I mean, I'd rather see more effort put into public awareness as far as keeping an eye out for people riding bikes and people walking, because Perm is a prime example. We went there one year and bike sharrows everywhere. We're in a residential neighborhood, both sides of the street. And where's Dad and his 2 daughters driving? Right down the center of the road. the sheriffs really don't do anything other than give the lawyer something to say, hey, they were in an area where there were sheriffs. I'd rather see people a little bit more looking at, you need to be aware of who's driving the bikes, who's walking, and a little bit more public education. I can't support this.
Thanks, Brent. Tom, and just to clarify, right now, we're not asking for any additional dollars to be spent. This
Okay.
would just be to go out to get quotes, but thank you for those comments. Go ahead, Tom.
I feel like someone needs to speak for the sheriffs. No, I think Brent and I would disagree on a lot of that, and that's fine. Yeah, I just for the record, I don't know if people riding on the sidewalk is necessarily the safest way to go, but we can finish that at another time. But I will echo what Brent said about there does seem to be an element of plan fatigue. So for the folks viewing at home, could you give us a short kind of elevator speech as to why we would need a bicycle and pedestrian master plan?
Sure, I can think of a few recent examples of some questions or situations that have come up that maybe a bicycle and pedestrian master plan would have been useful. So recently, the Planning Commission reviewed a preliminary and final plat for development on South Cascade Street, and there was concerns brought up during the public hearings about a lack of connectivity in that area. We did have sidewalks, I think, that did provide a minimal amount of connectivity, but there were concerns about that side of town and those neighborhoods on Hilltop, I believe, with a lack of connectivity. So a plan like this might offer some recommendations to address that. One big project that the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan Committee has kind of on their long-range back burner is improving some connectivity along County Road 111. There is some residents there that are trying to figure out how to improve safety and connectivity to kids that are trying to get maybe down to the YMCA or the school area from those neighborhoods on east or west of 111. Currently, there's no plan anywhere that kind of puts some recommendations on how to get that done. So they're kind of taking a tactical urbanist approach to it, trying to figure out grassroots ways to make those connections. So this would be another example of how maybe we would have a plan to figure out those connections. In the downtown master plan work, one of the big questions has been the safety of crossing Union Avenue or Cascade, not Cascade, Court, with the trail and all the pedestrian improvements. So crossing and safety has been a question in the downtown master plan. There's many other areas in town where there probably are some safety questions for crossing streets, so this would help as well with figuring out some recommendations for improved safety crossings. So just a few areas where it might help.
So with 111 being in my ward, I do hear a lot about that project. I support it. I think it's a great idea for a connection to have, for those families that live out that direction. During this planning process, would there be opportunities for folks in other parts of town to come together and request that projects that they might want to see be evaluated as part of it?
This would include community-wide public engagement. Every corner of the community would be invited to participate in coming up with recommendations that come into this plan.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So at this point, just to remind, we're just asking for authorization for the staff to go out and get quotes, and then we can come back. And there's, again, to remind, there's 12,500 grant dollars that have been received, and the city's committed right now to 7,500 in matching. So right now, we're just asking for authorization for the staff to seek quotes. So just to keep that, yes, Scott.
Along that line, I think it would be all right for you to seek quotes, as part of what Ben was even saying earlier, whether we'd get a good plan at $20,000 or at $25,000 at this point without the quotes, we don't really know. And so I don't think it would be a problem to authorize going out and looking at quotes, but adding another $5,000 to what's already been committed, I don't know that we need to do that at this point. And so I'd be willing to bring the motion to let them go out for quotes, but not necessarily include the $5,000 additional money.
So we get more information back from them.
Yeah, and one further comment was, even in your comments there, Brian, you mentioned how there's a lot of connection and overlap even with some other things that are in the works, particularly with trail planning. And we've got things with the legislature even now that we're talking about trail planning and stuff. And I can see where there'd be a lot of overlap. And if this master plan was in the works and there were people talking about it, that would naturally kind of help inform some of the trail work, I believe. And if we can do it with a lot of grant money, that's great. I don't know that, as, you know, Brent mentioned, the addition of, you know, plans upon plans upon plans, it ends up that we maybe sound like we're shooting in many directions. But in this case, it actually seems like it would tie together and give us some useful, helpful overlap.
I'll take that as a motion to authorize staff to seek quotes.
Without the $5,000 additional amount.
To seek quotes. Thank
Second,
you.
Your Honor.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Tom, any further
I was
questions?
just going to say that a plan for the bike ped committee would help with those last second things where they come in and say, I think you should do this on Lincoln,
Right.
when the plan's already in place. We have guidelines to work off of, and they would have guidelines to work off as too, so we wouldn't see those last second requests.
Good point. Thanks, Caroline. Any other comments, questions? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
That motion carries. Don't believe there's anything else to come before the committee? Anyone have any announcements or anything else to bring forward? We're adjourned.
No, Jim always steals.
How did the